thank you so much for coming to our little peer review workshop. It'll be good. It's relaxed, and we'll be able to eat and do some, I think, some really good exercises for just like how we want to look at papers and kind of discuss why we're looking at papers in this way. Anyway, so to start off, I have a video clip from El Dorado, like you saw, and it just kind of describes sometimes what goes wrong in our reviewing of other people's work.
Well, it's nice. Yes, nice. But is it really fit for the gods? My lord, I have been around both, believe me. And that the pointy, tall, the long up and down thing. The mast. The mast, yes, mast is good. Well, look at it. I mean, there's not nearly enough rope. Yes, a rope. Exactly my point. Vertical ascension requires a lot more rope. Oh. And look, this doesn't look at all secure. Chief, I'm sorry, but all in all, it is a complete do-over.
Okay, so I love this movie, and I love Kenneth Branagh and how he portrays this character. But the funny part about this clip is that you can maybe see yourself looking at a paper and you don't like it, and you kind of start doing this. And the thesis is just not good, and you start kind of like rattling off things maybe because you don't like it, or the same thing happens when you do like it a lot. You can say, I really like this paper, like I don't know why, and so you kind of just well everything, and it's good and we shouldn't change anything, or the opposite, it's a complete do-over. But there's nothing substantial that he's saying about what needs to happen, right? Was there anything else that you noticed about kind of how his review of the boat?
You also have to sort of know what you're talking about to be able to offer an authentic critique of something.
Definitely. Yeah, which is hard sometimes, I think, with papers, because once in a while, especially with the topic of the paper, once in a while you don't know a lot about the topic. But you have to be informed enough to be able to give some kind of qualified response, right? The idea behind this workshop is that you already know, I mean, you're grad students, you've reviewed papers, you've written so many papers, you know what good writing looks like, and you know how to identify like what's going well and what's not going well. But what we want to do today is just look at specifically how we can build those counter arguments to someone's writing. And that's really what it is someone has an argument throughout their paper, and we're bringing in a counter argument to say, this is where it works and this is where it doesn't. Kind of like, didn't they have a portion on the GRE that did something like that? That was like, analyze this person's argument, and you went through and said why it was good and why it was bad. Okay, so these are the pillars that I've come up with that are looking at big picture, but also giving us like a comprehensive view of how to give us a good peer review. The first is engage with ideas, and then looking at the end product, and finally giving specific feedback. So we'll go through all of those. Okay, to start off with, this journal is a journal, Gnovis journal is a journal of communication, culture, and technology, right? So the first thing that we look at, even as editors receiving a paper, is does it fit this realm, right, that we're talking about? So I wanted to just kind of like get your ideas. What does it mean? What does CCT mean? Or what are the ideas that are kind of at the foundation of that all of our papers need to somehow fit into? We'll just throw out words and kind of create a map over here.
If it's two of the three, or even one of the three, to me, it's like the intersection of those lenses and looking at any topic.
Yeah. definitely. Are there any like more specific topics that you feel like fit really well? I mean, just even topics that are kind of in the current dialogue that you feel like exemplify something that we'd want in CCT?
And there are topics like artificial intelligence or like social media that are interdisciplinary in nature, basically. But there isn't really a way. I mean, you can approach them from a singular discipline, but they sort of represent this coming together of those three topics.
I like what you said, that it has this intrinsic interdisciplinarity. It has to, maybe not it has to, but those are the best kinds of topics that we're talking about, are things that naturally or organically flow into all three: communication, culture, and technology. Are there any other thoughts about what can make this scholarship CCT? Awesome. So, and I also like, Rima, what you said about having a lens, right? That we can look at really anything, but the lens is important, right? That we're bringing in our perspective or our background knowledge of all of these things to be able to analyze a certain argument. So, okay, so as far as engaging with ideas, we know that these are the ideas that we're kind of looking for in the first place. This is what we want to see. This is what we want to see grow out of their work. But the other side of engaging with ideas is to question the assumptions of the piece, right? And to question what's going on. So the following question is, by questioning these assumptions, do obvious holes appear in the argument? So I wanted to talk about Harry Potter. My husband and I read Harry Potter in the car to each other, like while we're driving places, and it's awesome, and I love reading Harry Potter. But there are some holes, right? Okay, so there's a difference. If you look at it internally, right, you say, okay, I accept the premise of Harry Potter, I accept her definition of the magical world, then what holes appear as I'm reading through? But if she said this, why isn't this happening, right? And then there's the other perspective, the outside perspective, questioning her definition of magic in the first place. So you're all familiar with Harry Potter? Generally, what are maybe holes on either side, internal or external holes, that you could think of?
I have one that has always bothered me, just the fact that the magic people do not accept technology from non-magical society, when, you know, like they can do all these awesome spells, but they still use quill pens. I feel like a student who didn't come from a magical background might say, hey, can I use a Sharpie instead of using a quill? Is that allowed in class? I feel like there'd be more intersection in real life between, like, I don't know, the internet and magic than like no Wi-Fi in Hogwarts.
Right, and they do have like plumbing, and they have internal combustion engines in cars. Like they use cars in the books, so yeah, where is the kind of the crossover, and what kind of technologies do they use and what do they not use? And they have that funny telephone booth that they go to the Ministry Magic in, but then they don't actually use telephones. I don't know. Okay, one other one that I thought of was at the end of the fourth book. Okay, J.K. Rowling has responded to this, but at the end of the fourth book, Harry's already seen Cedric die, and then he goes back to the Hogwarts Express, and he says the horseless carriages drew up, and we got in them. And I'm like, hello, Harry should be able to see the Thestrals. That was the whole point. But J.K. Rowling said, oh, well, he hadn't come to terms with Cedric's death, therefore he wasn't completely in that mindset to be able to see them. I'm still questioning that. But so anyway, so there's some interesting things. You accept her premises, and then there might be holes, or not accepting her premises. Why aren't they using technology, or what in the magical world would, you know, keep them in kind of the 19th century instead of following along with modern things? Anything else that you can think of? Yeah.
So one thing that's always fascinated me is the fact that I've never been sure as to whether they're Christians, whether they believe in God, because they have their own, because they can do magic and do wizards, right? But at the same time, they celebrate Christmas and they celebrate Easter, but they're not Muggles. So their understanding of Christianity or religion as a whole is something that I've been a little, confused about.
Yeah,
Because I don't know if they believe in God because they're wizards themselves.
definitely.
We also have godparents, which is always a personal pet peeve. As
Godparents,
reasons.
which is a very Catholic thing, right?
Yeah.
And they, and some of the expressions that they use, say Lord or God or something like that, and you're like, well.
But they're never shown as like going for mass or like practicing religion, except for celebrating Christmas or Easter.
And there's never any like really serious discourse about the ghosts and their place in the people, because I think there's the one book where Harry's kind of obsessed with the idea that his parents could be ghosts, or or that Sirius is a ghost. But there's never really any discussion of that, what that means to be a ghost as opposed to somebody who passes on into another eternal life or something like that.
Definitely. Okay, so these are really good points, and I think that as we keep this in mind, this is a fantastical work. She's an amazing author, really. Just by the fact that you can go back and read her books and come up with all these questions means she's a good author. But as we look at these papers, we have authors ranging from J.K. Rowling status to, whatever. And you have to be able to say, okay, looking from the outside and then looking from the inside. And that is where it really doesn't matter how much you know about their topic necessarily, because you can say, okay, I accept your premise here, but there's still a hole in your argument. Okay, moving on. Looking at the end product. So I worked in a writing center for a while, and one of my favorite things to do with people's writings is to divide it into sections. This is a Petrarchan sonnet. We'll look at a Shakespearean sonnet. So there's obvious sections, right? And this is by rhyme scheme, what happens in the sonnet. But in people's papers, there's also an obvious organization, or there should be. And a lot of times as we write, because it's organic, because we're just writing and getting all of our points out, a lot of times that gets mixed up. I would say most of the time, or pretty much all of the time, your first draft does not have the perfect organization that you need, because you keep adding things or thinking of new things, or thinking that it flows one way when in reality your reader, because they need to follow along with what you're thinking, they need it in a different order. So we're going to do a little activity. I have a sonnet. It's 4 stanzas. You'll probably recognize which one's the top and which one's the bottom, but in the middle, sometimes it gets confusing because the rhyme scheme is the same and you don't really know what he's talking about. So I want you to try and see if you can put it in the correct order. Okay, do we think we've got it? At the top is sonnet number, who knows what that number is, because I didn't look at it long enough. 38. Okay, and then first stanza. Let me look.
Use one subject.
Yeah.
Yes. Second stanza.
Oh, I saw the things.
Did you guys get that? Dang it. Third stanza.
Ida.
Ida, my muse. Ida, the 10th muse. There we go. And then last stanza is the couplet, right? You guys did awesome. So when I'm
Looking at a paper, I like to sometimes get a little more hands-on and not necessarily don't cut the paper into all of its paragraphs and try to order them. But you can go through the paper and make a backwards outline, which means put Roman numerals next to all the paragraphs, identify what the topic of that paragraph is. If you identify the topic correctly of each paragraph, like you did here, you can then find the best organization for the paper. And sometimes by looking at the words, it's hard to do that because you think, oh, well, the transition from this paragraph to this paragraph is so great. But sometimes the topic transition isn't as great. And so if we can reorganize it the way the topics need to flow, you can redo the transitions easily. Our last one is to give specific feedback. So what do you feel like is specific and what's not specific? We saw the example at the beginning, but what feedback maybe have you gotten in the past that was helpful or was not helpful? Rima?
Well, I think in general, I also used to work at a writing center, so like I was sure to like do this all the time. A lot of times when people give feedback, they'll say, you know, this part wasn't clear, or maybe this sentence, like I don't understand how this sentence fits into the rest of the paragraph. But a lot of the times they don't explain why. So like, you know, this sentence specifically isn't enough information for me. But like sometimes as the writer, I want to know why. Like what is it about the context of the rest of this paragraph that made this specific part not flow with the rest of it or not connect? Mm-hmm. So I think that answering, when you give feedback of saying this isn't clear, but I'm always active to say like this is why I don't think it's clear. Maybe it's this word, or maybe it's the context, or maybe it's the sentence structure, because there's always a different reason why. So I tend to always comment like this is what I think about this, and then this is why. I think sometimes people forget to explain why.
Definitely.
Yeah, to that end, there's nothing more infuriating than having somebody circle something and just put a question mark next to it. You're like, what's wrong with, like, what about it did you not understand? But at the, like on the other end of that, getting feedback that is like just non-specific, like this is good, or this is like, this like doesn't work. This is like sort of what Ringo was just saying, but like the other end of it where it's really like effusively positive is really unhelpful, I think, because it obviously can probably be, it can still be better and more specific. Mm-hmm. And so just getting like, this is perfect, keep going is not helpful.
Or even, I mean, like it feels good, but even if they were to say how you organize this paragraph, like by doing this and this and this, is what I like to see, and it's similar to what I need to happen in this other part of your paper. Or being able to, give them positive feedback on one section, say this is what you need to apply elsewhere. Oftentimes if you say, oh, it's too wordy, maybe give them an example of their sentence. This sentence, I could reword it in 5 words. Or saying, you use this, if you say, oh, sometimes you repeat, or we like to say like your subject-verb agreement is off, or your, you use different forms of this word and they're not correct. Sometimes, especially with ESL students, it's easy to just kind of give them a grammatical principle, but it's not helpful. They need to have specific examples of what they're doing wrong and where they're doing it wrong so that they can fix those things. Or even just giving them a principle and one example and saying this happens in other places, take it to the writing center, take it to someone who can sit down and read through it with you and point all of those instances out. Great. Anything else that you have about feedback, Rima?
I think it can be kind of frustrating if someone's reading a paper and they give like specific feedback on the side. So like, oh, maybe this sentence needs to be shorter, or this sentence needs to, expound upon this, or anything like that. But I think it's really important at the end to give overarching content, not just like feedback, not just on this specific sentence or this specific transition, but like the whole idea. Maybe you don't tie in this like reoccurring theme enough, or I noticed that you often tend to use this frame or this word or this like style. I think it's important to look at, like give specific feedback in the microcosm and then give feedback in general to like the entire piece at large. Sometimes people don't do that. It feels more like red pen, like grammatical content, and then there's not actually like ideological, looking at the entire idea of this content, like feedback.
Definitely. And I think there is too specific. At this stage in the review process, we are not doing copy editing. So any kind of like little grammatical things that you see, unless it's distracting from the message of the paper, we don't need you to point it out or to fix it or anything. That being said, if it does distract from the message of the paper, please do. Please say, like, this is what I see right away. As a whole, the paper is being kind of taken to one side because of the grammar or because of this specific way that you're framing things. But going through, and doing a red pen on the whole paper is not going to be super helpful, especially because as you engage with the ideas, as you say, okay, this is where your argument might need to be improved in general, and then as you look at the organization of the paper, a lot of their wording is going to change automatically. And so we need to get them to that point where the work expresses really clear ideas, and then be able to work on the grammar and things like that. So keeping in mind that they'll receive, we do clean up the comments that you give to our authors. Like, we make sure that, especially because we have 2 people peer reviewing one paper, and so if 2 people say the exact same thing, we'll condense it and kind of like give them a holistic view of what they want, but they are going to see your comments. And so you want those to be as productive as you can, and you want to make sure that there's not holes in your argument, right? As we talked about having this counter argument. So you want to make sure that you're not leaving some gaping hole that they're going to miss, that they're not going to be able to really correct, maybe because they're focusing on things that are too specific, or maybe because they feel like they have to fixate on one part of their paper when they need to look at the whole. So we're going to go through the questions that are on our Google form right now, and then I want you to just kind of like read through them, see if there's anything else that you would ask. Or anything else that you'd want to be included in the feedback to help you give the best review that you can. And then we'll do kind of a peer reviewing exercise. I don't think we often get a lot of feedback on how well we review. And so we have like 2-page writing samples, and we'll give each of you one, and then you can swap with a neighbor and see like if you can understand the review, what you think about it. So first we'll hand out these questions.
You have choices for your writing sample: narrative voices, differences in oral and written tale-telling, and political manipulation through episodic socialization.
I read that differently. Like, I interpret that as, if there are technical terms, or if there's terminology within this field, like, do you make it clear? Do you explain in a way that a layperson could understand what those things are without being kind of like patronizing? I think that's something that can be.
Definitely. And I think that, like, as a journal, we all have a foundation of like graduate work and some technical knowledge, but you're right, like, they need to at least present it in a way that is semi-accessible, right? Mm-hmm. I think theoretical applications, you can say like, okay, I'm using this theory, let me explain it really quick and then move and like apply my paper with that theory, but explaining actual technology and stuff needs to have a pretty...
There's like very specific terminology that you would only know if you were immersed in this field. I think it's valuable to just take a second, even if it's an acronym, if you have to explain what it is.
Right. We have a couple robotics papers from our last semester, and they did a really good job, both of them, of like making it accessible, because the argument of the paper wasn't about the robotics, it was about the ethical implications of robotics, like in education and other places. And so having that be really clear of what the robotics does and how it works is super important, so I like that. Other comments about the questions? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and pass out these examples, and that's kind of the end of our instructional portion of this. We'll do these examples, kind of switch them, and talk to your neighbors about what works and what doesn't work as far as reviewing, and then we'll have pizza. And you can, for those of you who have papers, MC and RIMA, right, for the journal, then you can work on those if you have time right now. So feel free. And hold on, see if that's it. Yes, I have those. Oh, and I'll leave these up. This is the goals for peer review that we also include on the form, but if you have any comments about that, or just to kind of keep that in mind as we go. So just to recap really quick, remember that as you're looking at the paper, you want to engage with the ideas first. That's the most important thing. What is their argument saying? Does it apply to what CCT is, or how can it apply to what CCT is, and how can that be really clear? And then making sure that the organization is solid, that the ideas flow nicely from one to the other, and being sure that you give specific feedback, that your counter argument is just as strong or stronger than their actual argument, you know? Okay, thanks.